Now let me take you into the woods, where three friends thought they were lost, until something found them first. Before we begin, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because this is only the first part of a nightmare. The trip was supposed to be simple. A weekend getaway, a long drive up the coast, and a stop at a tiny cabin Mark swore he could find without GPS. But by the time the sun slipped behind the redwoods, the dirt road had ended in the middle of nowhere. "We'll just cut through the woods," Mark said, tossing his backpack over his shoulder like it was no big deal. Eli and Sarah didn't argue. What choice did they have? The deeper they went, the less the forest felt alive. The crickets that chirped near the car were gone. The wind that had moved the branches was gone. Even their footsteps felt swallowed by the trees. That's when they heard it. A sound so out of place it made the three of them stop cold. Wings. Not the kind of flutter you hear from a bird overhead, but a heavy, dragging beat, like leather snapping in the air. Mark tilted his head, squinting up at the black canopy. "You guys hear that?" Before anyone could answer, something dropped from the trees with a force that shook the ground. Black feathers exploded into the air. Talons longer than knives wrapped around Mark's chest before he could even scream. Eli and Sarah froze, too shocked to move, as the thing lifted him like a rag doll. It wasn't a bird. It was bigger, its wings stretching wider than the branches above, eyes glowing faintly as its beak opened wide. Mark's scream was cut short as the creature slammed him against a rock. The sound of bone breaking echoed through the trees. And then came the feeding. Wet, tearing, crunching. Flesh pulled from bone while his body still twitched. Sarah clamped a hand over her mouth. Eli grabbed her arm and pulled her down behind a fallen log. They watched, trembling, as the beast ripped their friend apart piece by piece, swallowing chunks of him whole. Then just as suddenly, the air changed again. Light flickered between the trees. Torches. A line of figures in black habits stepped into the clearing, faces half hidden by their hoods. Nuns. Their voices rose in a low chant, words neither Eli nor Sarah understood. The creature froze. Its wings folded back, and in a burst of feathers, it was gone. The nuns turned toward the survivors. Their faces were calm, their hands reaching out as though nothing had happened. "You are safe now, children," one of them said softly. "Come with us." Eli and Sarah followed the nuns because there was nowhere else to go. Their legs shook with every step, their minds still replaying the sound of Mark's bones breaking. Sarah wanted to scream, to run, but the torchlight pressed her forward, and Eli's grip on her wrist was the only thing keeping her steady. The path wound deeper into the woods until the trees gave way to stone. A tall iron gate appeared, half rusted and twisted, with a wooden cross mounted at the top. Behind it stood the convent, an enormous, crumbling structure with pointed arches and dark windows that seemed to watch them approach. The nuns pushed the gates open without effort, their chants fading into silence as they guided the students inside. The air changed the moment Eli crossed the threshold. It felt heavier, thicker, as though the walls themselves exhaled. Inside, the convent smelled of incense and old wood. Candles burned in long rows, casting soft orange light across cracked stone floors. The sisters led them into a wide dining hall, where bowls of steaming stew waited, as though they had been expected. Sarah hesitated, but the oldest nun smiled gently. Her face was pale, her lips almost too red. "Eat. Rest. You are safe here." Eli tried to believe her. He was starving, shaking from the cold. He picked up the spoon, but the moment he raised it, he caught something, just for a second, floating in the broth. A feather. Small. Black. He blinked, and it was gone. Sarah's hands trembled too badly to eat. She stared at the nuns seated across the hall, their eyes lowered, their mouths moving silently in what looked like prayer. But their prayers didn't sound holy. They were too soft, too fast, like whispers spilling from lips that never stopped moving. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay on the thin cot, staring at the ceiling, while Eli breathed heavily beside her. The convent was quiet at first. Too quiet. Then came the noises. A muffled laugh. A door creaking open. The sound of footsteps where none should be. Sarah sat up, her heart hammering. She crept to the door, pressed her ear against it. And that's when she heard it, moans. Low, heavy, unmistakable. She glanced back at Eli, who was still half asleep, and whispered, "Do you hear that?" He sat up, rubbing his eyes, listening. The sound grew clearer. A man's voice. A woman's gasp. Then silence. Without thinking, Sarah pushed the door open. The hall was empty, lit only by the glow of a single candle. She stepped out barefoot, Eli right behind her, and followed the sound down the corridor. At the end of the hall, a door was cracked open. Through it, shadows moved against the candlelight. Figures pressed together, robes falling to the floor. Eli pulled her back, his face pale. His voice was barely a whisper. "They're not supposed to be doing that." Sarah's stomach twisted. She remembered the stew, the feathers, Mark's scream, and for the first time since the bird attacked, she wished they'd never been saved at all. Eli wanted to turn back, to pretend they hadn't seen anything, but Sarah couldn't let it go. The image of those shadowy figures in the candlelight haunted her every step back to their room. By morning, she was restless, pacing. "Something's wrong here," she whispered. "They didn't just find us out there. They were waiting." Eli didn't want to believe it. His hands were still shaking from watching Mark torn apart. He wanted to hold on to the idea that these nuns had saved them, that anyone was on their side. But then the bell rang for morning prayers, and they were ushered into the chapel. The service looked normal at first. Rows of villagers from the woods knelt beside the nuns, heads bowed, hymns filling the air. But there was no warmth in the singing, no joy. It was hollow, droning. Every voice was the same, like they'd been rehearsing the words for centuries. When the service ended, Sarah noticed something strange. A staircase at the back of the chapel, blocked by a heavy iron gate. A nun quickly shut the doors, but not before Sarah glimpsed what was beneath, flickering candlelight, and what looked like carvings cut into stone. That night, she convinced Eli to go with her. When the convent slept, they crept through the halls, with only the faint glow of their stolen candle. The iron gate at the chapel was locked, but Eli found a loose hinge, and together they forced it open. The staircase spiraled downward into cold, damp air. The further they descended, the more the walls closed in, carved with strange symbols they didn't recognize. At the bottom, they found it, a chamber stretched wide, lit by dozens of black candles. In the center stood an altar, its surface smeared with dried blood. Around it, feathers. Dozens of black feathers scattered like a nest. And bones. Not just animal bones. Humans. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, but Eli clamped a hand over her mouth, his eyes wide with terror. Before they could move, a soft voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." They spun around. A nun stood in the doorway, the same one who had smiled so kindly when they first arrived. Only now, her smile was wrong, too wide, too sharp. In the candlelight, her teeth looked longer, her eyes darker. She stepped forward, her voice low, almost a hiss. "You've seen what you weren't meant to see." Eli's grip tightened on Sarah's arm as the nun stepped closer, her shadow stretching across the candlelit chamber. The calm, gentle face she wore upstairs was gone now. Up close, her eyes weren't brown at all. They were black, the kind of black that swallowed the flame of the candles without reflecting it. We were lost," Eli stammered, trying to find words. "We didn't mean to." The nun's smile widened. "Yes," she interrupted softly, "you were lost. And we found you. That's how it always happens." Sarah pulled back, shaking her head. "What do you mean, always?" The nun didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside, and for the first time Sarah noticed what stood behind the altar. A stone slab, almost like a table, and on it, something wrapped in cloth. The nun reached down, pulled the fabric away, and Sarah's knees buckled. It was Mark, or what was left of him. His skin was gray, torn open across his chest. One arm was bent the wrong way, his face frozen mid-scream. The gashes where the bird's beak had torn him apart hadn't been closed. They had been carved wider. Clean, deliberate cuts. Like someone had kept working on him after the monster was finished. Sarah choked back a sob. Eli turned, gagging, his stomach twisting. The nun tilted her head almost lovingly, as she brushed a finger down Mark's ruined cheek. He was chosen first. The creature claimed what it wanted, and we took the rest. Waste not. Her voice had no shame, no remorse, only devotion, as though she were explaining scripture. Then, another sound filled the chamber. Footsteps. More nuns entering from the shadows, their faces blank, robes brushing against the stone floor. They circled the altar, murmuring words Eli couldn't understand, their voices rising in rhythm. Sarah grabbed his arm, whispering frantically, "We have to go. Eli, we have to go now." But the sisters' chant grew louder. And as it did, the chamber seemed to change. The air thickened, the walls almost pulsing like the inside of something alive. A low rumble echoed through the floor, a sound that wasn't human. One of the nuns lifted something from the base of the altar. A bowl. Inside it, floating in thick, black liquid, was a bone stripped clean of flesh. She raised it to her lips and drank. The liquid ran down her chin, dark and sticky, and her eyes rolled back in ecstasy. Eli's hand clamped over Sarah's mouth to keep her from screaming. His heart pounded, so hard he thought they'd hear it. The lead nun looked up suddenly, as if she'd heard his thoughts. Her eyes locked onto the shadows where they hid. "Children," she said gently, almost like a mother scolding her own, "you've seen too much to leave us now." The circle of sisters turned as one, their feet dragging across the stone floor, their faces blank but hungry. Sarah's voice was a broken whisper. "Eli, they're going to kill us." But she was wrong. The nun's smile widened again, and in that smile there was something worse than death. "Kill you," she said softly. "Oh no, my dear. We are going to share you." Eli dragged Sarah up the stairwell before the circle of chanting nuns could close in. Their candle went out halfway up, plunging them into darkness. But fear gave their legs strength. They didn't stop until they burst back into the chapel, gasping for air. Sarah's hands shook violently. She pressed her palms against her face, whispering over and over, "He's gone, Eli, he's gone, he's gone." Eli grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me, we're not yet. We can get out of here." But getting out wasn't so simple. The convent wasn't empty. Every hall had footsteps, every shadow hid movement. They realized quickly they couldn't sneak out at night. The sisters never truly slept, so they waited. By Sunday morning, bells tolled across the convent. The villagers arrived, men, women, even children, filling the chapel pews. Eli and Sarah were herded in with the rest, pressed between bodies that had no idea what these walls truly hid. The mass began. Hymns filled the air, low and droning, each note vibrating in their chests. Sarah glanced around, searching for a way out, but every exit was guarded. Her eyes met Eli's. His jaw was tight, his hand clenched around the small flask of lamp oil he'd stolen from the hallway. She shook her head violently. "No," she mouthed. But Eli's eyes were already set. Halfway through the sermon, when the congregation rose for prayer, Eli made his move. He slipped down the side aisle, dousing the curtains and wooden beams with the oil. Sarah followed in terror, whispering frantically, "Eli, don't. Please, we'll burn alive." But it was too late. Eli struck a match. The flame caught instantly, racing up the curtain and crawling across the rafters. Gasps filled the chapel, confusion rippling through the villagers. But the nuns didn't panic. They didn't scream. They turned as one, their black eyes fixed on the students. The fire spread faster than either of them expected. Smoke filled the air, choking Sarah's lungs. Villagers stumbled, crying out, pushing for the doors, only to find them barred shut. Screams erupted. The pews overturned in the chaos. And above it all, the nuns began to chant. Their voices didn't break, didn't waver. They sang through the flames, their robes catching fire, their faces calm as the smoke blackened the ceiling. Eli grabbed Sarah's hand. "Now," he shouted, pulling her toward a side door. They rammed it together, with splintering under their weight. The fire roared behind them, chasing them down the corridor like a living thing. A nun appeared at the far end of the hall, blocking their escape. Her habit was on fire, but she didn't flinch. Her charred lips pulled into a grin, and she whispered, even as her skin cracked and burned, "You'll never leave us." Sarah screamed, and Eli threw his shoulder into the side window. The glass shattered, slicing his arms, but they clambered through into the cold night air. Behind them, the convent burned. The bell tower collapsed with a thunderous crash, sparks rising into the black sky. The villagers' cries were swallowed by the roar of flames. Eli and Sarah ran, stumbling through the woods, the glow of the fire still flickering behind them. They didn't stop until the trees hid it from view, and even then, Sarah couldn't breathe. Her chest heaved, her whole body trembling. "We did it," Eli gasped, clutching his bleeding arm. "We're alive." But Sarah didn't answer. She was staring back through the trees, her face pale, lips trembling. "No," she whispered. Eli turned. Through the wall of smoke and fire, on the edge of the burning convent, stood a figure. A nun, her robes blackened, her face untouched by the flames. Her eyes, empty, endless, locked on them. And even through the crackle of burning wood, they heard it. Her voice, soft, calm, promising. "Children, you cannot run forever." They ran until their legs gave out, until the smoke faded, until the only sound was the thundering of their own hearts. Eli collapsed against a tree, coughing blood from the glass that had cut into him. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, clutching his hand like a lifeline. The glow of the fire still pulsed faintly behind the trees, painting the night sky in orange. "We're okay," Eli rasped, though he could barely keep his eyes open. "We made it out, we're okay." Sarah wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the nightmare was behind them. But every time she blinked, she saw Mark's face again, his mouth open in a scream that never ended. She heard the wet sound of flesh tearing. She saw the nun's eyes, calm and unblinking, as the flames consumed the chapel. They found a road at dawn. A truck stopped for them. A family inside gasped at the sight of two bloody, smoke-blackened students staggering from the woods. Sarah climbed into the back seat with Eli, holding him as tightly as she could, whispering promises she couldn't keep. By the time the nearest hospital appeared, Eli was gone. His hand slipped from hers, his head tilted against her shoulder, and she was alone. The fire made the news. Reporters called it a tragic accident, an old convent, centuries of dry wood, and a sudden blaze. Dozens of villagers dead, the nuns unaccounted for. Sarah tried to tell the truth. About the bird, about the blood, about what she'd seen beneath the chapel. No one listened. Doctors called it a shock. Police dismissed her. Weeks passed. Her burns healed. The nightmares didn't. She saw them everywhere, in the hallways at school, in the reflection of her window at night. Black eyes, charred smiles, lips whispering prayers too fast for her to understand. And then she disappeared. Her parents said she was last seen near the coast, walking toward the woods where the convent once stood. They never found her. But others swear they did. Because on certain Sundays, if you step too close to the ruins, you can hear the bell tolling again, the hymns echoing through the forest. And if you're unlucky enough to look through the broken windows, you might see her, Sarah, dressed in black robes, standing among the sisters, singing in their choir with empty eyes. The convent still stands, not in ashes, not in ruin, but alive, rebuilt in the shadows of the trees. And it waits. It waits for the next children to get lost,